the purpose of this workshop this afternoon, or this actually is going to be a little bit of a talk, if that's okay, is simply to take one instance, one congregation of a very peculiar kind, that is to say, itself, and not yours or someone else's, all right, and talk about what happened there when the congregation undertook this process that we called visioning, and which has been called alternately in other places purposing, or other kinds of names that are given to these efforts that congregations make to seek that which will help to revitalize them in certain kinds of ways. I'm going to give you a little background about the congregation. It's kind of a case study, right? What we did is not prescriptive, or prescriptive, I should say, for any other community. I've already said this a little bit. It worked for us because we were who we were. Visioning is contextual. As they say in a 12-step program, then what you need to do as you listen to this story is identify, not compare, right? So identify with some things if they make sense to you, but don't try to compare your congregation with this congregation. You know, the thing we always get is, at least I do, is, well, your First Church in Cambridge, everybody there has PhDs, and you know, you got lots of money and all kinds of stuff. I think, no. It's not about that. It's not about that. In fact, sometimes those are the things that could have stood in the way, and often threatened to stand in the way. The giftedness of this congregation was as much, in some instances, curse as blessing. So it's not about, you know, well, we can't do that because we don't have, you know, yeah, whatever. We're not in Harvard Square. Well, gee, you know, neither was Jesus. You know, so, I mean, although some people think they've seen him there from time to time. All right, so depending on who you asked, again, the church was either stagnating, that word again, declining, or what I heard most often from people was, we're okay, but we could be better. And my own observation of the church was more or less like that this is a really good church. In some ways a healthy place, in other ways not so, but you know, really, this is a good church. But it's not a great church. And I think that First Church had aspirations to be a great church, really great church, but didn't know quite how to go about becoming one. And in any sense that was deep, any sense that had, you know, deep roots. And so all kinds of short-term solutions and technical fixes had been in the mix of what First Church was struggling to do to stabilize itself, to grow, to become more vital. Again, I have to insist, not because it wasn't, but because it had ambitions. Right? And I think that's the case with many congregations. Not that they're terrible churches, or, I mean, obviously we know that there are churches that are failing and that are dying, or that are struggling and maybe don't have a prayer. But most churches are sort of okay. But they need aspirations. They need something to try for. And without it, they continue to be good churches, and people come there and they meet God, and maybe their lives change a little bit, or they feel supported, or they just rest once a week, and that's all good. Or they contribute to the Strawberry Fair or whatever it is, and that's all good. There's nothing bad about it, but there is nothing really at stake, and that's the issue. That you have to find out what's at stake in all of this gathering and sending and activity and all of that. What is it that is at stake? So in the year 2002, toward the end of that year, this process went from 2002 to 2003, but I'm terrible with months and dates, so you know, all told, when you add it all up, it probably took about a year. We undertook a process that culminated in the congregation's affirmation of a vision that we called a way of hospitality. The reason it took that long, I think, was because in and through all the activities that we were doing in the process, we were not creating the vision. We were expecting one, awaiting one. We were looking for one. We wanted it discovered to us by God and the Spirit. And you know, as well as I do, the Spirit moves when she will. And sometimes she's not moving. Or she's, you know, she's asleep in the boat. She wasn't moving very fast most of the time for us. And I think if I had any expertise at all to offer, the whole process was constantly to frame it for people biblically and theologically. Not to let people revert to the notion of planning. Or to, not that there's anything wrong with planning. I think planning is essential in a church, obviously, but this wasn't a planning process. So in order to keep things on track mentally, cognitively, I was constantly helping people make the distinction and grounding it for them biblically and theologically. And the whole language thing came into that as well. The vision itself, if you look at it for a moment, it's beginning on page 11. This is the tail end of the feedback loop. It says, having heard all these things, all right, having listened, having discerned, having prayed. I mean, the tail end of the process was this team went into retreat for a day and a half and prayed like mad, argued like mad, reviewed all the documents again, all the things that we've heard, and then just begged, basically. It was a Pentecostal moment. I think anybody who was on the task force will tell you that it was a Pentecostal moment. They received a vision. And, we received it like good Congregationalists received it, in the midst of lots of yakking with each other. But it was all of a sudden it became pretty clear, and somebody said, this is about hospitality. And at first it sounded so pedestrian, like hospitality. But as I said, the guy that approached me immediately after the liturgy where we introduced this to everyone said, so that's what all this was about. We could have done that in 5 minutes. So hospitality, and then it started rolling. The minutes, that word was like a key that unlocked this torrent of affection. It wasn't even emotion. It was affection for this virtue. It was like God was in the room and we were loving God. So instead of a laundry list of tasks and obligations and ethical duty, we ask people to unleash their religious imaginations under the light of the notion of hospitality and see what a church would look like if it were indeed hospitable as God is hospitable, as the tradition is hospitable, as the gospel is hospitable.